Hello and welcome. Has the US failed in its promises to Latin America? Just last year at the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad, President Barack Obama acknowledged what many have called US interventionism in the region and pledged to make a new beginning based on partnerships.
The United States obviously has a history in this region that's not always appreciated from the perspective of some, but that what we need to do is try to move forward, and that I am responsible for how this administration acts, and we will be respectful to those democratically elected governments, even when we disagree with them.
But a year later, those promises appear to be largely unfulfilled. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is currently on a tour of Latin America and having to deal with widespread concerns that the Obama administration has shown no resolve or initiative in handling many critical issues there. Washington's backing of an election in Honduras, organized by coup leaders who deposed President Manuel Zelaya, isolated the U.S. regionally. Brazil's leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, said he was frustrated and disappointed. Also, the slow pace of diplomatic engagement with communist Cuba and Washington's deal with Colombia to establish several military bases in that country has added to perceptions that the Obama promise for change was merely rhetoric. Today we ask, can Hillary Clinton convince skeptical Latin American leaders that the US is committed to the region? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email, or just directly call in to the show. Well, joining me now in the studio is Michael Shifter, Director of the Andean Program at the Inter-American Dialogue. It's a US-based non-profit organization that deals with policy issues in the Western Hemisphere. We also have with us Joy Olson, Executive Director of the Washington Office on Latin America. She works on promoting greater transparency of US military programs as well as its foreign policy in the region. I welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Joy Olson, if I could start with you and ask what you see as the biggest challenge facing Secretary Clinton as she goes off on this tour, as she heads around to see these regional leaders.
Well, I think she has a real challenge before her. The Obama administration started out, as you said, with a great speech on Latin America at the beginning of last year. But then Latin America really took a backseat in terms of U.S. foreign policy. There was a lot of other things on the U.S.'s plate, and so the rhetoric of the initial part of the Obama administration has not necessarily been followed up with by visible, concrete actions. And what we've seen was the coup in Honduras, and then the U.S. response, which was rather sluggish, and then the elections, then the bases in Colombia, and so she has a real challenge to re-engage with the region and to make it clear that the region's significant to the United States.
We'll touch on some of these issues you raised, but it was at the Americas Summit in Trinidad in 2009. President Obama, we heard some of the comments there. He said a more constructive relationship, not simply words, but in deeds. But a lot of people feel that perhaps this sort of old Cold War mentality towards Latin America still lingers. Is that the case?
I don't think it's a Cold War mentality, but I think that that there is not significant prioritization of Latin America right now. And I think also that Latin America looks at the United States and again sees rhetoric and not necessarily action. So things like human rights issues that are so important in democracy. What we've seen is that the U.S. still hasn't closed Guantanamo, although that was again brought up at the beginning of the administration as something that Obama would do right away, and doesn't necessarily see accountability on human rights issues. And then when it came to the fundamental democracy questions, you saw what happened in Honduras and the U.S. response.
And these issues, Mr. Shifter, if I could bring you into the conversation here, they obviously have been ones that have made Latin American leaders express their disappointment in the sort of year on from the Obama administration coming in mentality. Now, I wonder to what degree what might have triggered the mood swing, though, that really has created this disappointment in policy.
Well, I think the disappointment has been around for a while, and I think it's mutual. It's here in Washington towards Latin America, and Latin America towards Washington. And I think the hope was that with the Obama administration, you could sort of break out of that and set a different course. And I think what we've seen is that that's been very difficult. The politics here and politics in Latin America are in different places. There are different perceptions, different ways of treating each other that clearly haven't been able to overcome some of the old habits. And that's what we've seen over the last year. And so I think Hillary Clinton's trip is an attempt to try to jumpstart that a little bit, but it's a very tough sell.
Now, on that topic, we had an email, if I could put to you, it came into our Facebook page from Ghana, from Accra in Ghana, where Awal English wrote in saying, The people of Latin America should wake up. U.S. foreign policies will never change. The U.S. will never think about having an equal partnership with them. So it looks like Hillary Clinton has a lot of persuading to do. I mean, to what degree do you think she's able to revamp Washington's credibility with Latin America?
Well, I think Latin America has woken up, and I think we see evidence of that every day. They are creating their own organizations. They clearly want elbow room and breathing space from the United States. That's been going on, and I think it's accelerated even under Barack Obama, the first year of Barack Obama. So I think the Latin Americans are waking up. The question is, what will the U.S. do in response? I think the risk, and it's not so much the U.S. is going to try to reassert its control, is that it's just going to give up on the region and withdraw even more, which I don't think is good in the long run for Latin America, and I don't think it's good for the United States.
Interestingly, on some of these topics that have been raised here, and Joy Olson, if I can put one to you, for example, a lot of critics say the U.S. administration's war on drugs, the so-called war on drugs, is a pretext for a stronger military presence, and Latin American countries such as Chile and Brazil have expressed concern about their lack of involvement in this, or lack of consultation as well. We've got Plan Colombia. I wonder how much damage is being done by this sort of push into Latin America in this form.
You know, the U.S. drug policy toward the region has really focused on eradication, getting rid of crops at their source, and interdiction in recent years. But eradication ends up focusing on a lot of times on small farmers who are incredibly poor, and ends up being not a very effective way to attempt to control the flow of drugs, but has huge collateral damage on really poor people, basically, who are not the big money makers in the drug trade. And so it has that focus has been not popular at all in many parts of Latin America. And one of the interesting things that you see right now is pushback in Latin America. I think there's a huge shift going on in the region in terms of the region's relationship to the United States, and becoming a regional actor, not just a regional actor, but an actor in the world, much more than it has before. And I think the U.S. is having to adjust its relationship to the region. And specifically on drug policy, I think in many ways Latin America is moving ahead of the United States in trying to promote and implement harm reduction policies in a way that the U.S. hasn't really gotten to yet.
What about this relationship that Colombia has with America? Is it going to leave Colombia more isolated then from its neighbors?
Well, I think Colombia has kind of been there in terms of isolation from its neighbors for a while. At least it had a rather tense relationship with them. So that's not necessarily new.
Ironically, it's Brazil that's very much in the headlines right now, Mr. Shifter, and that's the issue of the president saying that he doesn't really agree with America's decision to put more pressure on Iran and its nuclear program. I wonder really how that's being received in terms of a view in the region, and how it might position Brazil's relationship with the U.S.
Well, I think it's going to be a problem, an irritant in the relationship. Clearly, Brazil is feeling very good these days. They have tremendous confidence. They're being more assertive. Regionally, globally, they have strong relationships with India, China, Russia. That's the league that they play in, and they're going to have the Olympics. I mean, they're doing well. The president has 80% support, President Lula, and they're not going to let the United States set their agenda. They're going to defy the United States, challenge the United States, and have the kind of relationship with Iran that they think is appropriate and that reflects their priorities. And so they've made that very clear, and that's going to be a source of tension.
On that issue of the relationship between Iran and Brazil, and the planned meeting between the presidents, Hillary Clinton had this to say. We'll just listen to what she had to say on the issue of putting pressure on Iran.
I respect Brazil's belief that there still is room for negotiation. We believe that a good faith effort by Iran toward negotiation would be welcomed by the international community. We have yet to see such a good faith offer of negotiations. So we are proceeding in the Security Council. We are consulting with our Brazilian friends, because at some point we have to make a decision.
Joy Olson, there are those who believe that this whole trip is more about Iran than it is about Latin America in general. Well, how do you regard that perspective?
I don't think it's more about Iran than about Latin America. I think that they have wanted to try and put the U.S. relationship with the region back on a better footing. Iran has certainly dominated the press coverage of the trip, and is on the Brazil portion of this trip in particular an important issue for Clinton. Again, I think what you see here is not that the U.S. and Brazil have a real different objective in mind. I think arms control and non-nuclear proliferation is what both of them want. I think they're seeing two very different ways of going about it.
One question on this, again, related to the subject, if I can put it to you, from Maryland that came in by a viewer. Danielle Zaidi wrote in here from the U.S. saying, making demands and asking nations to break ties with any country the U.S. considers a threat is not exactly diplomacy. And that is the U.S. approach to both Latin America and the Middle East. How is that sort of pressure issue, putting the pressure on Latin American countries, the comments by Secretary Clinton, how do you think those resonate with Latin American leaders?
Well, I think that this is a point of the relationship is shifting, and I think the U.S. is trying to figure out how that is how the U.S. has related to the region in the past in many ways, and I don't think it wasn't all that well received in the past, and it's not that well received now. And I think that the U.S. is having to navigate new waters in terms of figuring out how it relates to its neighbors.
Of course, Mr. Schiff, Honduras was a big factor in showing the cracks that are appearing between the United States and some of the Latin American countries. And I wonder, what did Latin America expect from President Obama and the way that that issue was handled?
I think they expected that President Obama would be a little more forceful on the de facto government, the government that followed the coup of June 28th, and that the United States had more leverage than any other country, and they could have taken certain measures that would have succeeded in bringing back the legitimate democratically elected government in Zelaya, and the United States was perceived to be very ambivalent, taking some steps but not quite enough.
Is there anything that can be done to repair the damage on the Honduras issue right now?
Well, there are steps that are being taken in Honduras by the current government to pursue a truth commission, to try to take other measures to try to have more of a government of national unity. And I think there's a general desire to move in a direction of bringing Honduras back to the OAS and to the community of hemispheric nations. So I think that's moving in a process, and I think the U.S. is trying to push that forward.
On a similar theme, what we've been discussing, Mr. Shifter, I can put this to you. It's from an email from Saudi Arabia. We got from Sayed Zaki Ahmed in Riyadh, who says, is there any hope the U.S. will begin a new relationship with Latin America based on respect and collaboration rather than imposition?
Well, we hope so. I mean, I think that this is really a critical point and a test for the Obama administration. I mean, the good news is we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there's a lot more goodwill towards the United States in this administration than there was towards the previous administration. That's maybe not saying a lot, but it does offer some opportunity. And I think the problem is that has been a lack of focus and a lack of thinking and a lot of strategic thinking about how to deal with this new Latin America. It's a transformed Latin America, it's more assertive Latin America, it's a bigger actor regionally and globally, and the U.S. hasn't quite adjusted to that. Do I think it's impossible to be able to adjust? No, I think it's possible, but they need to work hard on it, and that's what we haven't seen yet.
All right, we're going to ask you some more questions in a moment. Very short break here. We'll be back with more of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away.